Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for being part of our program. Here we are together again on the radio. I haven't done this in years. I am devoting an entire program to an article that many of you have sent to me. There's so much here to talk about and so little time. So I'm going to read the article to you. And I ask that you pay strict attention. The reason I ask that you pay strict attention is because I know how people use radio. I know that I'm in the background while you're doing something else. And the result is that you may only hear every fourth word I say. In this case, I need your full attention. I need you to stop what you're doing. And I'm not kidding about this. I need you to stop what you're doing. And I need you to turn the volume up. Louder. Not loud enough. A little more. Yeah, that's good. All right. Are you listening now? Huh? Are you paying attention? Good. Let's get going here. Yeah, I like this. I like it a lot. I just do that all day. Here is the story. This, from a publication, and I want to make sure we get this all right. This is from a publication called City Journal. And K.S. Heimowitz, who we've mentioned on the air before, is a contributing editor of City Journal and the William E. Simon Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. It says here her latest book is Marriage and Caste in America. All right. I want you to know what we're reading here. I want you to know what you're getting. Here's the piece. It appeared in various places, and the Dallas Morning News is one of the places where it appeared, and many listeners in Dallas sent this right in. So thank you to all of you. It's called Child Man in the Promised Land. The subheading says, today's single young men hang out in a hormonal limbo between adolescence and adulthood. Here's the piece. It's 1965, and you're a 26-year-old white guy. You have a factory job, or maybe you work for an insurance broker. Either way, you're married, probably have been for a few years now. You met your wife in high school, where she was in your sister's class. You've already got one kid, with another on the way. For now, you're renting an apartment in your parents' two-family house, but you're saving up for a 3-bedroom ranch house in the next town. Yup, you're an adult. Now meet the 21st century you, also 26. You finished college and work in a cubicle in a large Chicago financial services firm. You live in an apartment with a few single guy friends. In your spare time, you play basketball with your buddies, download the latest indie songs from iTunes, have some fun with the Xbox 360, take a leisurely shower, massage some product into your hair and face, and then it's off to bars and parties where you meet and often bed girls of varying hues and sizes. They come from everywhere. California, Tokyo, Alaska, Australia. Wife, kids, house. Are you kidding? Not so long ago, the average mid-20-something had achieved most of adulthood's milestones. High school degree, financial independence, marriage, and children. These days, he lingers happily in a new hybrid state of semi-hormonal adolescence and responsible self-reliance. Decades in unfolding, this limbo may not seem like news to many, but in fact it is to the early 21st century what adolescence was to the early 20th, a momentous sociological development of profound economic and cultural import. Some call this new period emerging adulthood. Others, extended adolescence. David Brooks recently took a stab, calling it the Odyssey years, a decade of wandering. But while we grapple with the name, it's time to state what is now obvious to legions of frustrated young women. The limbo doesn't bring out the best in young men. With women, you could argue that adulthood is, in fact, emergent. Single women in their 20s and early 30s are joining an international new girl order, hyper-achieving in both school and an increasingly female-friendly workplace, while packing leisure hours with shopping, traveling, and dining with friends. Single young males, or SYMs, by contrast, often seem to hang out at a playground of drinking, hooking up, playing Halo 3, and in many cases underachieving. With them, adulthood looks as though it's receding. Freud famously asked, "What do women want?" Notice that he didn't ask what men wanted. Perhaps he thought he'd had that one figured out. But that's a question that ad people, media execs, and cultural entrepreneurs have pondered a lot in recent years. They're particularly interested in single young men for two reasons. There are a lot more of them than before, and they tend to have some extra change. Consider, in 1970, 69% of 25-year-olds and 85% of 30-year-old white men were married. In 2000, only 33% and 58% were, respectively. And the percentage of young guys tying the knot is declining as you read this. Census Bureau data show that the median age of marriage among young men rose from 26.8 in 2000 to 27.5 in 2006. A dramatic demographic shift for such a short time period. That adds up to tens of millions more young men blissfully free of mortgages, wives, and child care bills. Historically, marketers have found this group an elusive audience. The phrase is permanently affixed to men between 18 and 34 in ad speak, largely immune to the pleasures of magazines and television, as well as to shopping expeditions for the products advertised there. But by the mid-1990s, as SYM ranks swelled, marketers began to get their number. One signal moment came in April 1997 when Maxim, a popular British lad magazine, hit American shores. Maxim strove to be the anti-Playboy and Esquire. Bad boy owner Felix Dennis sniffed at celebrity publishers with their tired formulas. Instead, he later observed, the magazine's creators adopted the, quote, astonishing methodology of asking our readers what they wanted and then supplying it. And what did those readers, male, unmarried, median age 26, median household income $60,000 or so, want? As the philosophers would say, duh. Maxim plastered covers and features with pouty-lipped, tousled-haired pin-ups in lacy underwear, and in case that didn't do the trick, block-lettered promises of sex, lust, naughty, and it worked. More than any men's magazine before or since, Maxim grabbed that elusive 18 to 34-year-old single college-educated guy market and soon boasted about 2.5 million readers, more than GQ, Esquire, and Men's Journal combined. Victoria's Secret cover art doesn't fully explain the SYM's attraction to Maxim. After all, plenty of down-market venues had the sort of bodacious covers bound to trigger the young male's reptilian brain. No, what set Maxim apart from other men's mags was its voice. It was the sound of guys hanging around the Animal House living room, where put-downs are high-fived, gadgets are cool, rock stars, sports heroes, and cyborg battles are awesome. Jobs and Joni Mitchell suck, and babes are simply hot or not. Are there any cool jobs related to beer? A reader's letter asks in a recent issue. Answer: brand manager, beer tester, and brewmaster. Maxim asked the SYM what he wanted and learned that he didn't want to grow up. Whatever else you might say about Playboy or Esquire, they tried to project the image of a cultured and au courant fellow. As Hefner, famously and from today's cultural vantage point, risibly wrote in an early Playboy, his ideal reader enjoyed, quote, inviting a female acquaintance in for a quiet discussion of Picasso, Nietzsche, jazz, sex. Hearing this, the Maxim dude would want to hurl. He'd like to forget that he ever went to school. Maxim happily obliges. The editors try to keep readers' minds from wandering with articles like Confessions of a Strip Club Bouncer. But they rely heavily on picture-laden features promoting the latest skateboards, video games, camcorders, and other tech products, along with an occasional Q&A with, say, Kid Rock, all with the bare minimum of print required to distinguish a magazine from a shopping catalog or pin-up calendar. Playboy's philosophy may not have been Aristotle, but it was an attempt of sorts to define the good life. The Maxim reader prefers lists, which make up in brevity what they lose in thought. 10 greatest video game heroes of all time, the 5 unsexiest women alive, 16 people who look like they absolutely reek, and so on. Still, Maxim is far from dumb, as its self-mockery proves. The Maxim child man prides himself on his lack of pretense, his unapologetic guyness. The magazine subtext seems to be, we're just a bunch of horny, insensitive guys. So what? What else to make of an article entitled, How to Make Your Girlfriend Think Her Cat's Death Was an Accident? The only thing worse than a show about doctors is a show about sappy chick doctors we're forced to watch, or else our girlfriends won't have sex with us, the editors grumble about the popular with women Grey's Anatomy. The Maxim child man voice has gone mainstream, which may explain why the magazine sales were flat enough for Dennis to sell it last summer. You're that 26-year-old who wants sophomoric fun and macho action? Now the culture has a groaning table of entertainment with your name on it. Start with the many movies available in every guy-friendly genre. Sci-fi flicks like Transformers, action and crime movies like American Gangster, comedies like Superbad, and the seemingly endless line of films starring Adam Sandler, Jim Carrey, and the Frat Pack, as USA Today dubbed the group of young male comedians that includes Will Ferrell, Ben Stiller, Vince Vaughn, Owen and Luke Wilson, Jack Black, and Steve Carell. With a talent for crude physical comedy, gleeful juvenility, and self-humiliation, the Frat Packers are the child man counterparts to the more conventional leads, like George Clooney and Brad Pitt, whom women and Esquire editors love. In Old School, 3 guys in their 30s decide to start a college fraternity. Frank the Tank, the moniker refers to his capacity for alcohol, played by Ferrell, flashes his saggy white derriere streaking through the college town. The scene is a child man classic. In 2005's The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Carell plays a middle-aged nerd with a large action figure collection, but no action. In one guy-favorite scene, a beautician painfully waxes Carell's hirsute chest. As Carell pointed out later, this was, quote, a guy thing, this sadistic nature that men have to see other men in non-life-threatening pain. Even though the networks must be more restrained, television also has plenty of stupid fun, as Maxim calls a regular feature. Gross-out humor and even low-level sadism for child man viewers. This state of affairs is newer than you might think. Apart from sports programming and The Simpsons, which came along in the early 1990s, there wasn't a lot to make young men pick up the remote. Most primetime television appealed to women and families whose sensibilities were as alien to dudes as finger bowls. Does anyone have a finger bowl? Today, the child man can find entire networks devoted to his interests. Spike TV runs wrestling matches, Star Trek reruns, and the high-tech detective drama CSI. Black Belt TV broadcasts martial arts around the clock. Sci-fi is everywhere. Several years ago, the Cartoon Network spied the potential of the child man market too and introduced Adult Swim, late-night programming with adult cartoons like Family Guy and Futurama, a cult favorite co-created by Matt Groening of The Simpsons fame. Adult Swim has cut into the male Letterman and Leno audience, luring gold-plated advertisers Saab, Apple, and Taco Bell. Child men, it should come as no surprise, eat lots of fast food. One can also lay the success of cable giant Comedy Central at the child man's sneakered foot. In its early 90s infancy, Comedy Central had old movie comedies, some stand-up acts, and few viewers. The next several years brought some buzz with shows like Politically Incorrect. But it was in 1997, the same year that Maxim arrived in America, by the way, the same year the Tom Leykis Show arrived at 97.1 Free FM, that the network struck gold with a cartoon series starring a group of foul-mouthed 8-year-old boys. With its cutting subversion of all that's sacred and polite, South Park was like a dog whistle that only SYMs could hear. The show became the highest-rated cable series in that age group. In 1999, the network followed up with The Man Show, famous for its juggies, half-naked women with exceptionally large, juggies. Interviews with porn stars, drinking songs, and a jingle that advised quit your job and light a fart, yank your favorite private part. It was like Maxim for TV, one network executive told Media Life. Comedy Central's viewers, almost two-thirds of the male, have made both The Daily Show and Colbert Report cultural touchstones and launched the careers of stars like Bill Maher, Jimmy Kimmel, Dave Chappelle, and most notably Daily Show anchor Jon Stewart, who has already hosted the Academy Awards and is set to do so again, a perfect symbol of the mainstreaming of the SYM sensibility. Nothing attests more to the SYM's growing economic and cultural might than video games do. Once upon a time, video games were for little boys and girls. Well, mostly little boys who loved their Nintendo so much, the lament went, that they no longer played ball outside. These boys have grown up to be child man gamers, turning a niche industry into a $12 billion powerhouse. Men between the ages of 18 and 34 are now the biggest gamers, according to Nielsen Media. Almost half, 48.2% of American males in that age bracket had used a console during the last quarter of 2006 and did so on average 2 hours and 43 minutes per day. That's 13 minutes longer than 12 to 17-year-olds who evidently have more responsibilities than today's 20-somethings. Gaming, online games, as well as news and information about games, often registers in the top category in monthly surveys of Internet usage. And the child man's home sweet media home is the Internet, where no meddling censors or nervous advertisers deflect his desires. Some sites like mensnewsdaily.com are edgy news providers. Others like AskMen.com, which claims 5 million visitors a month, post articles like How to Score a Green Chick, in the best spirit of Maxim-style self-parody. How is an SUV driving, to-go cup using, walking environmental catastrophe like yourself supposed to hook up with them, the article asks. Answer? Go to environmental meetings, yoga, or progressive bookstores, but watch out for lesbians. Other sites like menarbetterthanwomen.com, tuckermax.com, the best page in the universe.com, and drunkosaurusrex.com walk Maxim's goofiness and good-natured women teasing over the line into nastiness. The men hanging out on these sites take pride in being, quote, badasses and view the other half bitterly. A misogynist is, quote, a man who hates women as much as women hate each other, writes one poster at Men Are Better Than Women, and another rails about a classic woman trap question like, does this make me look fat? Or, which one of my friends would you sleep with if you had to? Do you really enjoy strip clubs? The Fifth Amendment was created because its architects' wives, quote, drove them crazy, we'll say. I'm editing here. Asking questions that they'd be better off simply refusing to answer. That sound you hear is women not laughing. Oh, some women get a kick out of child men and their frat fart jokes. About 20% of Maxim readers are female, for instance. About 30% of our audience is female, by the way. And presumably not all are doing research for the dating scene. But for many of the fairer sex, the child man is either an irritating mystery or a source of heartbreak. In internet chat rooms, in advice columns, in female water cooler confabs, and in the pages of Chick Lit, the words immature and men seem united in perpetuity. Women complain about the Peter Pan syndrome. The phrase has been around since the early 1980s, but it is resurgent. The Mr. Not Readies, the Mr. Maybes. Sex and the City chronicled the frustrations of 4 30-something women with immature, loutish, and uncommitted men for 6 popular seasons. Naturally, women wonder, how did this perverse creature come to be? The most prevalent theory comes from feminist-influenced academics and cultural critics who view dude media as symptoms of backlash, a masculinity crisis. Men feel threatened by female empowerment, these thinkers argue, and in their anxiety, they cling to outdated roles. The hypermasculinity of Maxim et al. Doesn't reflect any genuine male proclivities, rather retrograde media construct it. The fact that guys cheer on female heroines like Buffy the Vampire Slayer as much as they do Chuck Norris tells against this theory somewhat. But there's an ounce of truth to it. The men of the new media are in backlash mode, largely because they believe that feminists have stood in their way as media gatekeepers. That is, agents, editors, producers, and the like, who don't understand or accept men acting like men. They gleefully stick their thumbs in the eyes of politically correct tiskers. In one South Park episode, the sexual harassment panda, a mascot who teaches school kids the evils of sexual harassment, is fired after his little talks provoke a flood of inane lawsuits. In Maxim, readers can find articles like How to Cure a Feminist, one of whose recommendations is to, quote, pretend you share her beliefs by asking questions like, has Gloria Steinem's marriage hurt the feminist agenda? Insofar as the new guy media reflect a backlash against feminism, they're part of the much larger story of men's long, uneasy relationship with bourgeois order. The SYM with a taste for Maxim or South Park may not like Gloria Steinem, but neither does he care for anyone who tells him how to behave. Teachers, nutritionists, prohibitionists, vegetarians, librarians, church ladies, counselors, and moralists of all stripes. In fact, men have always sought out an antisocial, even anarchic edge in their popular culture. In a renowned essay, the critic Barbara Ehrenreich argued that the arrival of Playboy in 1953 represented the beginning of a male rebellion against the conformity of mid-century family life and of middle-class virtues like duty and self-discipline. All woman wants is security, she quotes an early Playboy article complaining, and she is perfectly willing to crush man's adventurous, freedom-loving spirit to get it. Even the name of the magazine, Ehrenreich observed, defied the convention of hard-won maturity. Ehrenreich was right about the seditious impulse behind Playboy, but wrong about its novelty. Male resistance to bourgeois domesticity had been going on since the bourgeoisie went domestic. In A Man's Place, historian John Tosh locates the rebellion's roots in the early 19th century, when middle-class expectations for men began to shift away from the patriarchal aloofness of the bad old days. Under the newer bourgeois regime, the home was to be a haven in a heartless world in which affection and intimacy were guiding virtues. But in Tosh's telling, it didn't take long before men vented frustrations with bourgeois domestication. They went looking for excitement and male camaraderie in empire building, in adventure novels by authors like Robert Louis Stevenson, and in going to the club. By the early 20th century, the emerging mass market in the U.S. offered new outlets for the virile urges that sat awkwardly in the bourgeois parlor, hence titles like Field and Stream and Man's Adventure, as well as steamy affair like Escapade and Caper. When television sets came on the market in the late 1940s, it was the airing of heavyweight fights and football games that led Dad to make the big purchase. To this day, sports events, the battlefield made civilized, glue him to the Barcalounger when he should be folding the laundry. But this history suggests an uncomfortable fact about the new SYM. He's immature because he can be. We can argue endlessly about whether masculinity is natural or constructed, whether men are innately promiscuous, restless, and sloppy, or socialized to be that way. But there's no denying the lesson of today's media marketplace. Give young men a choice between serious drama on one hand and Victoria's Secret models, battling cyborgs, exploding toilets, and the NFL on the other, and it's the models, cyborgs, toilets, and football by a mile. For whatever reason, adolescence appears to be the young man's default state, proving what anthropologists have discovered in cultures everywhere. It is marriage and children that turn boys into men. Now that the SYM can put family off into the hazily distant future, he can and will try to stay a child man. Yesterday's paterfamilias or Levittown dad may have sought to escape the duties of manhood through fantasies of adventures at sea, pin-ups, or sublimated war on the football field, but there was considerable social pressure for him to be a mensch. Not only is no one asking that today's 20 or 30-something become a responsible husband and father, that is, grow up, but a freewheeling marketplace gives him everything that he needs to settle down in pig's heaven indefinitely. And that heaven can get pretty piggish. Take Tucker Max, whose eponymous website is a great favorite among his peers. In a previous age, Max would have been what was known as a catch, good-looking, ambitious. He graduated from the University of Chicago and Duke Law. But in a universe where child men can thrive, he has found it more to his liking and remarkably easy to pursue a different career path, professional a-hole. Max writes what he claims are true stories about my nights out, acting like an average 20-something, binge drinking. UrbanDictionary.com lists Tucker Max drunk, or TMD, as a synonym for falling down drunk, fighting, leaving vomit and fecal detritus for others to clean up, and above all, hooking up with random girls galore, sorority sisters, Vegas waitresses, Dallas lap dancers, and junior leaguers who are into erotic asphyxiation. Throughout his adventures, Max, like a toddler stuck somewhere around the Oedipal stage, remains fixated on his penis and his dumps. He is utterly giving without conscious female insecurity. It's the gift that keeps on giving. He writes about his efforts to undermine his praised self-esteem in order to seduce them more easily. Think of Max as the final spawn of an aging and chromosomally challenged Hugh Hefner, and his website and best-selling book, I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell, as evidence of a male culture in profound decline. Playboy's aspirations toward refinement still hinted at the call of the ego and a culture with limits on male restiveness. Max, the child man who answers to no one except his fellow a-holes, is all in and proud of it. Now, I'm going to leave the rest of this because it is a long piece. It's challenging. We will link to it on our website, and you'll be able to read the entire piece yourself. Okay? But coming up, we're going to meet the author of this piece, Kay Heimowitz. She's joining us from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm going to ask her a bunch of questions because the guys she's talking about in this piece are guys that sound an awful lot like us.
Tom Leykis.
It's the Tom Leykis Show. That 1-800-5800-TOM. I read you the better part of this piece. It's a long piece. It's challenging to read, and you can read the whole piece. It is online in any number of places, and we'll link through it through our website to it as well, so you can see it and read it for yourself. Well, we are joined by the article's author. The article, in case you didn't hear the very beginning of this was a lengthy article, and we are devoting our entire program to some of the issues discussed in here. It's called Child Man in the Promised Land, and the author is Kay Heimowitz of Brooklyn, New York, and she joins us now. Thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
What instigated you to write this piece, if I may ask?
Well, I can tell you one thing. I'm sort of regretting it now. If you could see the mail that I've gotten. I have two daughters in my 20s, and I'm wondering whether they'll ever have a date again.
Wow.
But, well, to answer your question, I've been hearing so much from young women in their 20s, so many complaints about men. And so many complaints about their immaturity, about their failure to commit, on and on in that vein. Not just my daughters. In fact, my daughters don't complain as much as some women I know about it. So I was curious about that issue, and also about the fact that women do seem to be beginning, at any rate, to outperform men in the workplace, or in certain parts of the workplace. For instance, in New York City, young women in their 20s, college-educated women in their 20s are now earning more than men. So it struck me that something was going right for women in a way that it wasn't for men. And as someone who's very interested in how we are shaped by the culture around us, I began to look at that culture for men and was surprised at what I found.
Now, I've read your piece in various forms because I imagine you have submitted it as an op-ed piece to various newspapers, and so I've read it in various forms of editing, and finally found the entire piece and got to read the whole thing. And you may not be aware of our radio program, but the guys you describe in your piece are our listeners. Mm-hmm. And they are our listeners by design. Our radio program took this form in 1997, like a lot of the things you describe in your article, because there's a demand for a radio program like this. I know where you live in New York City, they don't really have anything like this, but in many cities where our show is heard, there's a big demand for this kind of content. And I wonder, as we get started here with this conversation, I don't see anything in here about the perception by men, whether you think it's fair or not, that divorce is a real deterrent to marriage. When people hear how guys got taken to the cleaners, women got their pound of flesh, men are living in studio apartments or worse, their parents' houses because they got their bank accounts cleaned out. Is it possible that might have something to do with men not wanting to get married?
Well, I'm glad you brought up that point, because I have gotten a lot of mail from men who are saying precisely that. They believe that they got a very raw deal in marriage and have seen other men they know who've gotten a raw deal and want to stay away from the whole institution. And I suppose I would say this. I do think that I actually believe that men are getting a raw deal in many cases, and I expect to do a follow-up piece that's a little bit more sympathetic to the impact that feminism, I think, has had on young men and on women's relationship to men.
I mean, one thing I ask all the time on this program, and I say this as someone who's been divorced more than once, what's in it for men to get married anymore?
Well, in a divorce culture, I suppose you could say that there's not much. But the problem is this is a self-perpetuating phenomenon. In other words, you have men who are not appealing to women as possible husbands who then, if they do get married, are maybe not behaving in ways that women find very satisfying, who maybe continue to see themselves as youngsters, as adolescents, and are not willing to become more grown up and take responsibilities.
Well, hang on one second. You talk about not wanting to take on responsibilities. Why create responsibilities where none exist?
Well, why? Because what's your alternative? What kind of life do you want to have? Do you want to have a life where you never have long-term serious relationships, where you don't have children?
I'll tell you
where
what,
you never live with your children?
We have to take a break. When I come back, I'm going to talk about my own lifestyle, which is the one I talk about to my listeners. And I'm going to ask you to tell me where I'm going wrong if you think I'm going wrong.
Oh, okay.
All right. Now, my listeners don't know what I'm about to tell you, but I'll tell it to you, and then I'll let you tell me what's wrong with my lifestyle, okay? Mm-hmm. And maybe there's nothing wrong with it in your opinion, but I'll give you an opportunity to critique it.
Sounds good.
Okay, hang on. Kay Heimowitz is with us. She is the editor of City Journal, and she wrote this piece called Child Man in the Promised Land. If you go to blowmeuptom.com, we link right through to her piece. You can read it. You can decide for yourself how you feel about it, and we'll get to your telephone calls as well coming up.
Tom Leykis.
It's the Tom Leykis Show. We are joined by Kay Heimowitz, who is the editor of City Journal. Their web address, by the way, city-journal.org. And we're talking about her piece, which is linked on our website, Child Man of the Promised Land, which I never, at least not in the last many years, I've never devoted an entire show to one subject. I think the last time was 9/11, if I recall correctly. And so it is rare. But this article seems to speak directly to the people who listen to a program like this one. Now, Kay, before the break, I promised to tell you a bit about me and my lifestyle. And I'd like to get your critique on this. I've been married and divorced more than once. I am now divorced, and my attitude is there's no incentive for me to get married. I own a house in the Hollywood Hills with 6 plasma screens, 2 jacuzzis, 1 indoor, 1 outdoor, a stripper pole, a large collection of DVDs, the top-of-the-line DirecTV subscription called Titanium Service, where you get every channel DirecTV has, over 1,000 channels. I've just bought myself a second home for weekend partying up in the area where they filmed the movie Sideways, up north of Santa Barbara. This is a 5,000-square-foot house with 20 acres where I'm putting in a wine cave, a swimming pool, a spa, and a number of other goodies, so that when I'm not at home, I can bring my female company up there and continue the party up there. This is money that I would not have had I stayed married to women I've been with in the past, one of whom has a child that she is supporting, not from me, one of whom has had some problems with disabilities that occurred after she knew me. I don't have any of the expense of taking care of another individual. I have been through a couple of really tough divorces. What is my incentive to get married? Is there a problem with living this way?
Well, let me ask you this. Do you have children?
By design, I do not.
Mm-hmm. And you never want them then?
By design.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that changes a lot. Most people, including men, do want to have children at some point in their lives.
I think you should ask these men you're writing about whether that's as true as you think it is. Because a lot of these guys unwittingly get dragged into the net because the condom breaks or because they were drunk and weren't paying attention. I don't think there are as many guys who want to have kids as you think.
Well, you should look at the survey data. There's an awful lot out there, and certainly by the time they're in their late teens and early 20s, most men, the vast majority of men, say that they are looking forward to a family life with wife and children. So that is a desire of many, many young men.
All right, then the question becomes, what's the rush?
Well, I kind of agree with you about that. I think that there shouldn't be too much of a rush because there are all kinds of reasons to delay marriage these days. For one thing, people are not financially settled until their later 20s in many, many cases. There is more time because we live longer. So I don't, it's not so much that I think people should marry very early. We know that you marry too early and your marriages are not.
But the thing is, I don't know why men should have to marry at all.
The Tom Leykis Show.